Okay, thank you. It's a pleasure to be in front of you this afternoon and to, although a little bit daunting, to follow Anne. It's still a pleasure. I want to share with you a little bit of our work in Detroit. We had a really good intro by Victor, so I think you have a great deal of the background information, as Anne had noted. Also, I think many folks have successfully outlined the relationships between certain business activities and health, and so it allowed me to kind of cut through some material relatively quickly. I'll warn you in advance. There's a lot of content that's about to come at you, but I think you'll be ready. So this is a shot of our office, our implementation office. It's in our New Center area, which is the kind of top end of our Midtown district. It is intended to be a storefront, an access point for anyone in the city to come in who wants to do something, who wants to begin to help turn the city around. And it really functions in that way for us every day. We opened this office, the overall concept of the office, about 2 years ago, and the planning for Detroit Future City began about 5 years ago, completed and launched in the beginning of 2013. The vision that we've laid out within our strategic framework, this large document that Victor had noted earlier, the vision for this is one that recognizes that we need to have a rather immediate impact to improve circumstances on the ground for Detroiters, but that the changes that are really necessary, the structural changes, are going to take decades and they're going to take generations. We did not get here overnight, and we're not going to get out of it overnight. In fact, many folks in the past who have launched vision plans, and there's a bunch of them for Detroit, really missed this, right? It was more of a large kind of growth regime transaction than it was a substantial change in the city. I'll let you kind of read some of these items, but what we wanted to lay out for people was that, look, we can do some things right now. Here's where we want to start, and we actually developed this content a little over 2 years ago, and I brought it back because I think it starts to hit some of the key points, and it shows, look, our first 3 points on this list are tied to business, and they're tied to where we put businesses, and they're tied to workforce. And so this wasn't something that I shaped just for this presentation. It's something that's been woven into our thinking from the very, very beginning. Because at the end of the day, for working age population in the city of Detroit, only 50% are actually employed. That's a staggeringly low number, and all the other kind of societal impacts that we talked about this afternoon and earlier this morning are true. We have to get more Detroiters employed, and you'll see that kind of come through loud and clear. And there's a whole array of other things, though, that need to happen, and I want to talk with you first about some of the bigger kind of contextual pieces. I want to frame that for you about our bigger objectives, those things that you see on the slide right now. What the realities are that are impacting Detroit, and what our strategies might be to begin to address them. From there, though, I think what we can do is begin to illustrate how some folks, particularly businesses of various sizes, are beginning to fulfill some of those objectives and some of those strategies. This big idea here to have a stabilized population overall. We've lost 60% of our peak population of 1.85 million. We're somewhere around 700,000. We need to stabilize that. There's many folks that point to it and say, actually, we need to grow our population. That's the most important thing that we could do. And we don't disagree that growing a population would be good. But what we believe is that making sure that we can improve circumstances on the ground today and in the future for Detroiters is the most important thing, and that we will then create a value proposition for many others to join. We also want to make sure that we can double the number of jobs in the city for reasons that are quite obvious at this point. We have to make sure also that we can have greater regional cooperation, including our regional transportation system that's just starting to emerge. And also make sure that we can be a globally recognized leader in adaptive land reutilization. We've got a lot of vacant land. I'm going to show you a lot of it, and we can do a lot with it. We just haven't really taken the time to really consider that in the past. I think now we're beginning to get there, and there's many folks with significant influence that are getting there as well. Ultimately, though, we have to make sure that we have a much more enhanced and sustained and broad-based setup for civic stewardship as we move forward. This is one of the most important and enduring pieces of Detroit Future City. It is about physical space and place, but it is absolutely about people. So for us, we feel like this moment in the city's history is very critical, right? It's a moment where we do have new governance. We've got a new mayor. We have regional cooperation that's beginning to emerge where it's really not existed at all in the past. A dynamic economy is emerging out from within the city, a much more diversified distribution of innovation and tech firms, health-related enterprises, light-scale manufacturing, a whole host of things that we wouldn't have seen before, certainly as we lost 90% of our previous industrial jobs. We're seeing new transportation investment in light rail in the city. We're seeing new infrastructure brought in. And most importantly, or also importantly, public land coordination and land assets that we have. Big strategic priorities for us are ensuring, again, we have this real immediate impact on quality of life. This has a direct relationship, certainly, to health, both as a kind of impactor, but also as something that your quality of life comes from your health. We also want to make sure that we're also taking really substantial steps forward to achieve long-term fiscal sustainability. And often these two pieces at the top are diametrically opposed to one another, right? Because we can satisfy this very, very quickly on the left, and it will undermine what we need to do on the right. If we satisfy something on the right, people are going to wonder what's going on, and it's not going to be a good situation. So we've got to balance these things, and Detroit Future City exists right in the gap between those two worlds. And I can tell you professionally and personally, it's the most difficult thing I've ever done, because nobody, or many people, are not pleased with what we do on a given day. But somehow I feel like that's a mark of success as long as people can realize what we're trying to achieve down the road. So ultimately, we have to be able to pick low-hanging fruit and not be afraid to make mistakes. We've got to focus on big policy reform while we're actually also piloting action and make sure that we can lead here and bring people with us. This is a photo that you don't typically see of Detroit, right? This is not the one that's in Time magazine, the usual ruin porn that is all over, but nonetheless, it is one half of our international waterfront. I highlight it because it's the site of a tremendous amount of reinvestment. Tens of millions of dollars are being brought in monthly here. There's a number of buildings that are being brought back online. We're seeing also tens of thousands of new jobs brought in every quarter, and in some cases even faster. There's incredible growth going on in our central business district and in our overall downtown or greater downtown area. We're also seeing substantial residential growth. The numbers are still quite down, though, when you really look at it, but it is coming up, and it's coming up fast. And what we're noticing is that Detroit is beginning to turn the corner. And as we turn the corner, there are some parts of the city that are ahead of others, and as you wrap around, some parts of the city are seeing the other part come back and lap them, right? And that's where we have this. We also have 23.4 square miles of completely vacant land. That's occupiable land, and that's a little bit larger than the island of Manhattan. It's distributed across the city. It's concentrated in a few key places. We see it today. Most of us as Detroiters see this as a tremendous liability. We are trying to identify ways in which this can be a huge asset for us, and that is one of the most important pieces that Detroit Future City puts out there. How can this be the site for greater health for the city overall, recreation? How can this be the site for new green and blue infrastructure and stormwater management? How can this be the site for new urban agriculture and research? We think those things are possible. That's really what the work is about. And as we put this thing together, we had a lot of different pieces that came with it, right? And we were focusing on where we really strategize for economic growth, where we want to make sure where we can achieve greater densities, how we get people from where they live to where they work. None of these things are terribly innovative in their own right, but it's the way that they're integrated that's so important, and it's a really kind of foundational element for some of the things I'm going to share with you as we go forward. We also made sure that the work was really grounded in community feedback. This was, if nothing else, a landmark in participatory planning from the U.S. model. This is a situation where these conversations, these numbers impacted the work we did, and with the folks you see around the circle, those folks are not only contributors and real authors to the work, they are now fully equipped to help implement things as they move forward. And so we have people that want to help and want to shift things. And sometimes there's issues, right? There's disagreements around things, but by and large, people want to see themselves as advancing Detroit's future too. The five main pieces you see running along the top here are the core components of Detroit Future City, and they're a relevant framing for the conversation this afternoon. They all lay on this undergirding element of civic engagement, and that's true as we implement. We're going to take a look at a few of these really quickly. From the land use side, there's some key things to keep in mind. The center point there, the 20 square miles, is a round out is certainly true. Also, with all of that available vacant land, amongst the top 20 cities in the United States, we rank as the lowest for available park space per resident. So that's a challenge. We also have remarkably high obesity rates and a whole host of other health challenges. These things are certainly not unrelated. We also have overarching issues around service delivery and things like that we'll get into, and a real mismatch even in the housing product that we provide. Of all of the market demand we can track in the city of Detroit for new housing, and there's very little, it's all for multifamily, right? What we have, though, is mostly single family. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. The big thing coming out of our land use strategy, though, is that we have to begin to drive greater density in key parts of the city, and we've got to also then support an open space network. These two things go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. Detroit's never had this kind of pivot. It's always had one large blanket of single-family homes. And even when it was fully built out at just under 2 million, it was still a low-density city and arguably unsustainable. We have to become sustainable here. We have the opportunity to rewrite the future with everybody contributing to the text. So in this case, this is one of our evidence-based maps undergirding a lot of decisions in here. It's looking at demographics, it's looking at housing conditions, and a whole host of things. What we wanted to do was kind of to have a dispassionate, evidence-based approach that we could then begin vetting with residents and working through issues. And this began to serve as the undergirding structure for bigger analyses, looking at our overall current land use, which is very yellow, of course. It's dominated by single-family residential, and largely that yellow in key areas is vacant. And so it's not working for us. We still run a lot of systems through there, which we'll talk about in a second. We need to make sure that we can actually balance this land use and create a much more rational distribution across the city, one that actually promotes mixed use, multifamily in key areas, drives greater density, opens up spaces for open space, redefines neighborhoods today that are marked by 30% land vacancy, but where we actually have a considerable amount of people and actually relatively high density, oddly enough. These are areas that can be sustained as they are, but where we don't want to begin to siphon off development drive in there. We want to drive it in other locations. These can become green neighborhoods, right, where people can acquire side lots and so forth. So this all comes together. It lays out something like this, industrial to open space to where we live and where we work at the top. A strategic action plan has emerged from this, which we don't have to get into, but all of this is laying out a very, very thoughtful and very spatial approach to how we can do this. We think that if we don't operate from this basis, we can become, you can kind of fall to whatever the prevailing argument is of the day, and Lord knows that's happened in Detroit too many times. It leads us to the systems overall. Over the last 65 years, we've lost 60% of the public side revenues to support public systems. The city is 100% the size it ever was. That's a challenge. We have really struggled in the service delivery side, from water to waste to power to a whole host of things, public and private for that matter. And I think it's something that we're trying to hit head on and be very innovative and thoughtful about. We also have some tremendous environmental issues here. We have got real challenges in our public transportation system. And of course, we also, as we look at this, have situations where for Detroiters, a little under 20% of the total population does not have health insurance of any kind. This is a situation where we also have health effects. We have 50% higher death rates to heart disease than the national average, 3 times the rate of childhood asthma when compared to the national average. Some real struggles here that we think we can begin to impact with better and more strategic decision making and better investment that's tied to business opportunities and employment growth in the city. It gets us to the performance of the systems themselves and really reassessing how we deliver service in a city like Detroit. This map shows a differentiated kind of approach in where you kind of double or triple down on real robust systems that need to support the places of employment in the city, and where we need to think differently about how we provide services. In the past, many people would look at this map and say, yeah, this is the map where you tell me how much of my service you're going to remove. And that's not the case. This is a map that tells us how innovative we have to be to deliver that service to you. In the peach areas, as an example, where we have roughly 67 to 70% average land vacancy. That's not structural vacancy, that's land alone. In some areas, it's 90%. Right? This is where you have one home on a block. This is where we have challenges, for instance, where we drive one bus down a street 5 times a day for a population that is typically older, that is typically African American, it is typically female, it is not part of the active labor force, where person may need to go to the store or go to the doctor twice a month, 3 times a month, right? Bus, 5 times a day, right? No fare box revenue to support it. That leads you to bankruptcy, which we just emerged from, and really poor service for that woman that needs to get to the doctor. So how do we improve this? And so one of the approaches is to actually develop a paratransit network to allow her to go to the doctor, on-call service, run by the local church next door, where we actually provide a subsidy to cover the insurance rates that bus has to have to take her. Those are the systems. That's the approach that we want to take. It's not about denying service. It's about thinking differently about how we provide it. We also think we need to be much more thoughtful in how we deal with bigger systems like our stormwater management. So in Detroit right now, similar to many other cities of its vintage, we have a combined sewer overflow system. So if you don't know much about these systems, basically they take the sanitary waste out of a building like this and they combine it with the stormwater waste that goes in the street, right? It all goes to these treatment facilities down at whatever your body of water is. For us, it's at the Detroit River. Anytime we get a little over ½ an inch of rain in Detroit over a course of an hour or less, it often overwhelms our system and it does a direct discharge to the Detroit River. This is significant for a number of reasons. We sit at the nexus of 84% of the U.S. surface fresh water supply, 22% of the globe's surface fresh water supply. And we're going to the bathroom in it, right? And that's not good. And we've got major challenges here. And we can actually begin to use our available land area to address that, to bring in green and blue infrastructure, to mitigate the huge costs we pay on these systems, and to certainly improve the health of the Great Lakes and our population in general. It can happen on available land. It can happen on available rights of way and streets that we have far too much capacity anyway. And it ties back to a large-scale open space system, an identity for the vacancy that we have today as a real asset, where we can have recreation, where we can have agricultural production, we can have all of these things taking place. We just have to begin to reconceive that and see our future as being different than the kind of conventional model we had in the past. I think it's tough for a lot of us to get there, but we are beginning to understand its merits. An example of some of the projects we're working on to do that, this is a Great Lakes Restoration Initiative project with the EPA. We worked with some local partners to draw down $1 million from EPA and match it with $1 million locally with philanthropic dollars, the Kresge Foundation and the Herb Family Foundation. $2 million, massive impact, right? This is not a lot of money when you think about the systems costs in major American cities. We can do more of this across the city, and we hope that we will. We're also working with the Department of Energy on renewable energy production in the city, biomass and switchgrass, anaerobic digestion, certainly solar photovoltaic production. We can take about 35 acres of land and produce 5 megawatts of power. And we can do that in good weather in Detroit, where we've got sun. And then we can take it, we can store it in a pumped hydro facility, which means you just take water and you hold it up here, and then you let gravity fall when you need it, and you run it through microturbines to produce the power. It's actually the most efficient way to store power, water at elevation, not in a battery. And we can do it in Detroit. We can do it in a lot of different places, and we're actually getting to a point where we can do one of these projects. We're also trying to buffer people from noxious fumes from factories and also from fugitive dust on roadways. We're looking at a number of things. Neighborhoods really kind of reveal for you some of the major health impacts that we have too. Some significant situations here. 70% of our total population is either obese or overweight. Overweight youth, some really quite big numbers. If you think about also the impact on your everyday life in Detroit, of course there's high crime, particularly high violent crime over time, which is not unrelated to your ability to be employed, certainly. But we also have situations where people can't find the goods and services that they need in the city. And what's really interesting is this number up in the upper left is 1.5 billion is the average retail leakage we experience in Detroit every year. So these are people in Detroit taking their dollars and spending their money outside the city because they can't find what they need in the city. In many of these communities, in many of the places where they have the highest vacancy, the biggest disinvestment and depopulation, we have folks that simply can't find anything, right? And this is the situation in the area I was talking about for paratransit networks. These are areas, when they calculate this number, it's on dollars spent, not a transaction. So when you look at this, this is telling you, and by the way, we looked at the analysis across the city, and what we found was in these areas of the most concentration of poverty and the least density, we had the highest leakage rates. The people with the least were going the furthest to get what they needed. This is horrible, and we have to do better, and we can do better. We can actually begin to have a place-based strategy in how we provide these retail amenities, how we link people through transit, and how we support employment with it. This is a big part of how we improve quality of life. It's a big part of how we work with communities in neighborhoods like the one you see here that is next to this, which is next to that because they just took a house down there. Right now, our city takes down about 240 homes a week in a blight elimination strategy that's going to remove 80,000 structures out of our 380,000 structure portfolio. So there's a lot to be done here. There's more and more open land coming online right as I speak, right? We have to begin to think differently about how we approach all this. Part of this includes community arts programs on the available land, working with residents to do that, employing folks through deconstruction efforts, targeting industries here, renewable industries and reuse of materials. This is a pilot that we ran last year. These are the building materials that come off of it. We can resell these at a profit. We can retail them. There's no market in Detroit, so we send it to Chicago and they sold it. We can reutilize the vacant land. This is a guide that we're going to be coming out with next month. 35 different treatments that can provide all residents what they need to actually improve the lot that's next to them and give them a pricing and all that. Lastly here on economic growth, for every 4 Detroiters, 1 private sector job. Incredibly low. Most successful cities are around 2.5 to 1. We've got big challenges here for the folks in the city that are working, right? And I mentioned earlier 50% of working age population. The majority of folks are actually working outside the city, often service-based. The most of the jobs in the city, 70%, are going to folks who live outside the city, right? Professional services downtown, creative, finance, all that, and going to Starbucks essentially outside the city to serve coffee. We have to do better because we're really limiting opportunity here. We don't have many people who have cars in a city that's dominated by it with a bad mass transit system. So we have to begin to figure out how we can locate businesses and new enterprises in the city, in particular key areas that we can support. It is about strategic land utilization. So re-energizing the economy, increasing job opportunities in the tax base, a whole host of things here. Place-based strategy, local entrepreneurship and minority business participation is key. Skills and support for educational reform. The place-based strategy locks into key assets across the city, so it's not just we just say like, it's got to locate here for some reason. It builds on existing assets, assets that have previously not been really well identified, identifying underutilized land parcels in industrial areas for production, because in many cases the industrial jobs that are present today are highly innovative and they're also looking for people. Attach that to key upcoming infrastructure investments. And then tie that to some bigger strategies around entrepreneurship in minority business participation, particularly if you look at this list, understanding how we can get more folks to target funding up front early, get shared spaces, make sure that we can actually provide the kind of superstructure to support them. This is the place-based strategy as it runs around the city. I can tell you that for most folks in the past, the employment spectrum existed somehow in the middle, the little red thing at the bottom, the downtown, and the little blue thing above it, and that was it. Actually, we have an employment district all over the city. We just need to actually rationalize it, understand it, support it with policy, and invest in it, and that's what this is really driving at. Some of the things we've done, we were part of a team that helped to recruit Goldman Sachs and their 10,000 Small Businesses initiative to Detroit. We were the 16th city out of 16 to get Goldman Sachs in town, so it took us a little while, but we got them. And they, working with a number of other folks in town, providing debt capital and training, provide front office support, back office training, a whole accounting, legal, all of this, dollars up front to support the new enterprise, as well as the ability to kind of roll out product here. Really interesting work. We're also focusing on employment districts that people haven't really thought of in the past. They typically look at the greater downtown. We're also working with schools to help in job preparedness and a whole host of things. And I want to show you a couple of things really fast here. First is a kind of rundown of the things that are happening today that are working to kind of fulfill what we've seen there, right? And these aren't things that are pushed by Detroit Future City. These are things that are simply happening and are emerging right now. These are things that we think are really important for businesses to do today to begin to have a positive impact. Embrace strategic land use, make decisions and evaluate development options with an entire city in mind. The city itself, the city of Detroit and the mayor's office is beginning to do this in real ways, which is important, and we're really excited by that, and I think others are getting there. I don't have anything to show you on that one yet, but maybe if I come back in a year, I will. I'm hoping that would be the case. Beyond that, we want to make sure that we have folks that can support an open space network, not to see that as the place where we gave up, but actually the place where we succeeded most. Some examples include Recovery Park. This is an urban agricultural project that has already started that actually identifies at-risk employment. What they do is they take folks who have had substance abuse problems, some prison time, and folks that actually have high recidivism rates, and they draw them in, they employ them, and they grow food, and they actually have now contracts with a little over 10 restaurants in Detroit to grow the food, and they're expanding. A range of gardens across our city. This happens to be part of the Eastside Gardens, where we're seeing a huge growth in food production. There's some estimates that there are about 2,000 small working farms in the city right now producing a lot of food. For a city that's typically been separated from fresh food, this is huge, and it's a big opportunity for business and health. To make sure that we're driving better employment and purchasing in the city. This happens at a lot of levels, particularly at an institutional level. One of our major universities, Wayne State University at the center of the city, has a huge procurement program, and that is being targeted in the city right now through folks like NEI that Victor mentioned earlier. We're also looking to make sure that we can foster supportive relationships with surrounding neighborhoods, that the enterprises that are present don't just lock their doors at night and go home, that they're actually active participants there. A great example is Focus Hope in Hope Village. It's an organization that's been around for about 40 years. They've trained 12,000 Detroiters, and they work with a range of different folks, and they actually engage in their surrounding community to provide new ways to utilize the available vacant land. This is how this kind of business, this enterprise can work. It goes beyond just themselves. It extends out to the community, and we need to see more of it. This is also them during a cleanup project. There's also just small-scale firms like this, Hacienda Foods. It's a tortilla factory on our southwest side where we have a high immigrant population. There's a real mission-driven thing here where there's locking in employment and tying that to the local community. We're seeing more and more firms emerge like this. This one's been around for 20 years. It's weathered serious storms, went down to 3 employees, is back up to 80 and stabilized. It's minority and woman-owned. We also want to make sure that we can support small firm development, and as well as the training and financing that goes along with this. Part of this includes groups like Prosper Us and the 10,000 Small Businesses Initiative I mentioned earlier. These are really important enterprises because they provide this kind of intermediary space of training, in often cases some capital up front, and these folks are growing a number of firms across the city right now. One last example for you, highly pixelated as it is at Shinola. You might know that name from other circumstances, but it's actually a watch and bike manufacturer, a real boutique product, right? They're probably selling them in the Bay Area right now. They certainly sell them in New York. And ultimately, what's interesting here, though, is this product is made exclusively in Detroit. And it's made by Detroiters, and Detroiters have been trained by Swiss watchmakers to make the watches. I'm not sure who they were trained by on the bikes, maybe Californians. But nonetheless, you're building. This isn't just a kind of raw labor situation. You're building intrinsic skills that can then draw out to other things. And the product price is commensurate with what they need to then pay the folks. Right? You're not drawing down. You're not. So it's just an important point in a model I think that we want to see more of. So thank you.